So, about 2 weeks ago, I had this realization that for all of my life, I've been singing this song and I've missed the meaning the whole time through. And that's not real surprising to me that I would be singing a song and that I would miss a word. Anybody ever sing a song and you missed a word and you found out that you were singing? In fact, someone after the first service came to me and said, I know exactly what you're talking about because I've been singing this song called Voices Carry. This is going back, everybody in the 80s would recognize this song. So I had to pull it up in between services. It's by Till Tuesday, and it's called Voices Carry. And anybody know what I'm talking about? Dun, dun. I was always singing, it says Voices Carry. I was saying Mrs. Carey. Listen, for 48 years I've been saying dun, 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 dun. Let's see. Mrs. Carey. You know, it's like, and I know people were looking at me like, you're an idiot. Like, you don't know your music. So it's not uncommon that I would miss, O Come, Emmanuel, because I've missed many songs. In fact, it's funny because you're singing it for years. I'm singing a song for years, and then for one moment, I think about what I'm singing, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't sing that song. It's a bad song. Quit singing the song. And it usually happens when I have the kids around me. Because you begin, it's like watching a movie. You ever watched a movie and you've seen it 3 or 4 times and you bring the kids in and you're watching a movie, you're like, wait, when did they put that scene in there? And it's like, that was not in there years ago. I swear it wasn't in there. And so I'm singing a song and like the kids are like, or it's on Pandora or on whatever we're just playing. It's like, what am I singing in front of the kids? Do not listen to that song. Do not listen to that song. It's a bad song. You listen to that song and you end up in a van living by the river. You end up in jail again, whatever. So don't listen to that song. But, for my research for this series, which is, was, and is to come, series is, was, and is to come, for the research, I Googled the 10 most popular Christmas songs of all time. And then I would read through all the lyrics of those songs. And as I was reading through O Come, Emmanuel, I had this realization. I've been singing it not only from a wrong perspective, but I've been singing it with the wrong emotion. Because I've been singing this song like any other Christmas songs, and I think you're going to find yourself, you're out shopping, you're in your car at your house, and this song's going to come on, you're going to sing it, and you're just going to be all joyful. Because I used to sing it like this: O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. It's like dancing around, who that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appears. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. And I can sing it like that, but for only one reason. Because I'm on this side of that historical event that they were looking for. So I look back on an event and I can say, yes, he came. But the song's perspective is on this side. And they're looking forward this way. And they're going, would you please come, God? And there's a difference on the side that you're looking at. And sometimes we'll find ourselves on the side of going, please, God, hear my prayer. Heal my marriage. Save my son. And other times we will go, rejoice, rejoice. But I would like to read it from the angle that the exiles would have read it, because that's what the song is about. It says, O come, Emmanuel. Emmanuel just simply means God with us. So in essence, they're saying, O come, the God who seems to be distant right now. The God that I wonder, do you hear me? Do you hear my prayer? O come, Emmanuel. And ransom, another word some of you guys may identify with, means bail me out. And pay my bail, deliver me. And ransom, captive Israel, who mourns, or that mourns in lonely exile here. There's this idea of mourning and being in exile until the Son of God will appear. And it says, rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. But here's what it is. It's like, rejoice, rejoice. And they're rejoicing, and the answer hasn't come. They're rejoicing, and they're painfully waiting. They're rejoicing, and nothing, their situation hasn't changed. So we look back, what we do is we're looking back on an event, and we sing a song like, joy to the world, the Lord is come. And they're looking, and they're saying, God, would you please come? And we look back and we say, God, rest you merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. For Jesus Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day. And they would say, We're looking for the person. We're looking for the Messiah to come, to deliver us from this, from this exile, from the mourning that we're in. I love this. I love this song. I have a greater appreciation for it because it's filled with raw emotion. And it's filled with the emotion that you and I can relate with. We don't relate with being in exile in Babylon, but we do relate with the agony and the pain of waiting for God to answer a prayer or for God to change the world or to make things better. It's got words like in exile, in mourning, and lonely. It says rejoice, but yet rejoice and you haven't come yet. And you've got to understand what the context is for what this song would have come from, because the exiles are singing this song. Now, when you talk about exile, the whole exile motif is a big motif. It's a big subject in the Bible. Because ever since the Garden of Eden, we have all been exiles. Right? Adam and Eve was banished from the garden, right? Never to return back to the garden. You're banished from something. They were exiled from a place that they were supposed to live. Born, created to live in perfection, utopia, shalom, joy. And they have been banned and banished from the very life. When we say they, we ought to just go ahead and say we have been banished while on this earth from the very place that we were created to live. We'll never get back physically to that place, but we're always trying through different means to get back to the shalom and the peace and the joy and that meaning and like, this is the place that I want to live. This is what I was born to do. We're always trying to get through that. We'll get glimpses and little tastes of moments of heaven, but we'll never reach it completely because we're living in exile. In 722 AD, check your history books, the Assyrians was the great world power. They came to Judah, and they began a deportation of the Jews to take the Jews away from their city. In 586 BC, the Babylonians was now the political superpower of the day. The Babylonians led by King Nebuchadnezzar. 586 was their third time to come to Jerusalem, and this third time is when they did most of their damage. So they take Jerusalem, and they tear it down. They make it basically uninhabitable, and they take this temple that was rebuilt. Not that was rebuilt. They take Solomon's temple, this great temple, where the Ark of the Covenant, and where God lived, and where people worshipped, and where you made your sacrifices, something that was so dear to just the life of Israel, and they burn it down. You imagine watching this. It's your hometown being destroyed, your temple being destroyed. And then they take thousands of the Jews and they depart them. They march them to Babylon, where they will live 70 years in exile in a place that they weren't created to live. So when you hear about Babylon, you hear stories, or you were possibly raised on some stories like Daniel in the lion's den. That came in the time of exile. Daniel is put in the lion's den because he won't abide by their rules. He's still going to pray. He won't be acculturated into the way that they live. He's not going to live by their doctrines. He's got his own way. You have the three Hebrew children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It happens when they were exiled, when they were taken away from home. And they are going to be put in the fire because they won't bow down to the idol. So they're living away from where they were intended or where they were supposed to live. So this context is 586 BC. So how many of you know that pain and darkness in times like these has an uncanny way of reminding us that we're dependent upon God? How many knows that pain and loneliness and struggle has an uncanny way of reminding you that you are not in as much control as what you think you are in? In the same way that success can happen, success has an uncanny way of kind of bringing a false comfort and a false sense of security that we don't need God as much as we need until something falls apart again, and then we have to find ourselves crying out to God and saying, God, I'm just not as good as I thought I was. I need your help. It's like C.S. Lewis says it like this. We find out during those moments that we need God, and then God comes through and it like hits the spot. And he said that if you find yourself with a desire that no experience in this world can satisfy, if you find yourself with a desire that no experience in this world can satisfy, then the most probable explanation is that you were made for another world. If you find yourself with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy long term, then the only valid conclusion is that you must have been meant for another world that can satisfy that desire. And so when we find out that romance or love or relationship can't meet all the needs that we thought they were going to complete us. We thought this was going to be the greatest part of our life. And they seem to come below our expectations. Or our job didn't come through. Or, we've got a good bit of money, but the money, now we get there and it wasn't what we thought it was going to be like. It's because there's certain these voids that we have can't be filled by anything in this world. It's going to take something outside of this world. So look, we find ourselves on this side of history, and we look back at the event of Jesus coming, our Messiah coming, but they didn't. They're painfully waiting. They're painfully waiting for Jesus to come, or for not so much Jesus, they wouldn't say Jesus, they would say for a Messiah to come and deliver them and return them back to the rule of David, because that was their good years. And we can't relate to being in Babylon, but we can relate to being exiled or waiting on God. And we're praying, God, would you please help me. Please help this world. Stop the evils. Let some light shine. I talked to two parents this week, and their voices were desperate. And they were saying, I'm praying, I need God to do a miracle in my home. I need God to save my family. I need God to turn my sons, my daughters' hearts towards Him. And if you've ever been in this situation, it's the voice of a parent whose heart is breaking. And that's the world we live in. We don't understand maybe what it is physically to be in exile, but we know what it is emotionally to be in exile and to be waiting on God. So I had a message to call this lady this week. I've never met her, never talked to her, don't know who she is, still wouldn't know who she is, and I think lives out of town. And I just called and said, hey, this is Pastor Reg. I had a message to give you a call. And the moment I said that, she started sobbing. She said, I need help with my son, adult son. I'm worried, I'm concerned. Could you please do something? And see, we find ourselves, and that's why I like this song, because it's the raw emotion of crying out to God. And they're saying, rejoice, rejoice. But yet they're still waiting for the answer to come. And what they're doing is they're building up their faith to say, we can still, we're in this agony, we're in this moment of waiting. We're praying, God, heal me physically. I got a diagnosis, and I'm praying, God, heal me physically. Or sometimes we're wondering, how long will I deal with this sin? Or how long will I deal with this emotion or this brokenness? And we're praying for God to come through. And what the song tells me is that they're in the same situation physically and emotionally and in every other way. And they're hurting, and they're lonely, and they're in exile, and they're captive. But at the same time, they're speaking to their hearts in some way. And they're saying, rejoice, rejoice, have joy. And they're saying, why can I have joy? And the answer in this song, I think, is theologically correct. Because Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. And they're speaking to their own heart to say, what is won't always be. What is won't always be. Based upon what? Based upon the promises of God. And so they begin to build their faith based upon what was. So we're calling it what is, what was, or he is, and he is to come. So although we're on the other side of God entering our darkness, we look back and we say he entered our darkness. They would look and they say, we're hoping he would enter our darkness. We can still relate to the struggle of waiting or being misplaced. So listen to this, and I want you to catch this. This is the big point, or something that we need to build as we go forward. Just as we wait for the second coming of Christ, how many know Jesus is coming back? He's coming back. It's good news. And he's coming back to restore this world back to the original. I know, you know what, and you may be with me, I just say, I don't know how that's going to happen. Will that happen? When will it happen? Will it happen? And I gotta tell you, I believe it, but I still have some doubts, right? I want it to happen. So when he restores the world back to the original, it's going to be just like Eden was prior to the fall. It's going to be perfection. And so we're waiting for the second coming of Christ. But we're waiting for the second coming just like they waited, the exiles waited for the for the first coming. Look, they're waiting for the arrival. We're both waiting on the arrival of the same person, but two different events. Now, waiting is waiting. We don't understand with waiting for the first return because we look back and said he did come. Hey, be hopeful over there on the other side of history. He's coming because we see that. And they would be going, oh, just to have our Messiah, just to have the deliverer come. We want him to come. But whatever we're waiting on, waiting is waiting. I mean, anybody else here enjoy waiting? How many of you love to go to the DMV, right? Just get so excited. And this is why we love going to Chick-fil-A. It don't matter, Chick-fil-A could have 2.5 million cars in the drive-thru. And the place next to it, 2 cars. And I'm like, I'm going to Chick-fil-A, right? They're going to get me through here in about 5 minutes. I'm going to scan my app. I'm going to get some red status going on. I'm going to get some points. But here's the deal. Waiting is even more troublesome. In fact, some of you guys right now, I think we would all say that we're waiting on something. We're waiting on God to answer a prayer. We're waiting on a promise to be given to us. Waiting is very troubling, especially when you don't have any control over the circumstance. When you can't do anything to speed up the situation. So for us, we look back and we go, oh, that was great timing when Jesus came, right? That's great timing. That's 2,000 years ago. We didn't have to sit there and wait on Jesus to come the first time. We're like, oh, yeah, God's good. These guys over here, they thought, are you ever going to come? God, you're late. God, you're late. But we know this from Galatians 4:4. Paul writes to the church at Galatia. He wants them to know. He said, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son that was born of woman, born under the law. When the fullness of time has come. So let's just leave that up there for just a moment. What does that tell you about God's timing? Listen, just think about that. Don't answer out loud. But what does it tell you when it says, when the fullness of time had come? Some version says at the right time, at the proper time. God sent forth his son. So what does this tell you about God? Was God late? Was he early? How many of you know that God's rarely early, but he's never late? God is a right on time God. Because what this tells me when it says the fullness of time came, that God has a master plan. And that what we're waiting on is it's ordained. This was already ordained, what they were waiting on. That God knows what's going on. He's not early, but he's never late. And so what they could say, or what we could say to them, hey, if we could speak back in time to you, we're going to tell you, he is coming. He is coming. So go ahead and sing this song. Rejoice, rejoice. Go ahead and rejoice in your wait. You know what I'd be saying? Rejoice when you're in exile. That's what I'd be telling them. Now, it's easy for me to tell them that, right? Because it's easy for me to tell somebody who's about to enter in something, hey, no problem. Like it's easier for you who's come out of surgery to go, hey, it's no problem, to the one that's going into surgery. It's a different type of feeling there. They're going into it, you've come out. But rejoice, rejoice. Emmanuel, he will come to you. He'll come to you, Israel. He's going to help you in your exile. So what they're saying is, captive ones, rejoice. Lonely ones, rejoice. Those of you in exile that's lost everything that's dear to you, rejoice. Those of you who mourn, go ahead and rejoice. In fact, you say rejoice. What does that mean? That means have joy, right? Rejoice, rejoice. Have joy. We go, why can I have joy? And I say the same thing. Why am I waiting? Why am I waiting for God to do something? Waiting in my grief, waiting in my sin, waiting on my deliverance. How can I be in this spot in my sadness or frustration and still wait with joy? It doesn't really make sense. And they would say, we can do that via the song because our deliverer shall come to us. Well, has he come to you? No. But knowing that he will come to us produces faith in me and hope in me that what is will not always be. Well, how do you know that he will come to you? And they would say, because what was? And we go, well, what are you talking about, what was? And they would go, there was a time our ancestors would tell us. As a little kid, I was raised up, we were around the fire, and my grandfather would tell me the story about how God came down on a mountain. He wouldn't just tell me about the story of God coming down on a mountain, but he would take me through the story, because that's oral translation was how the Word of God, the law, was passed on. So grandpa and dads would tell it and repeat the story over and over to the children. So the little kid might say, or the adult would say, so as a little kid, my grandpa would say, you know, what's a good Hebrew, what's a good Hebrew name? Well, I don't know. Who? I'll go with that. Matthew. And by the way, amens still, we had to say, the more amens you say, the more calories you can burn on a Sunday. So just let you know, right? Amens will burn calories like crazy. There ought to be a lot of that going on today. Amen. So Matthew, I want to tell you about our ancestors. I want to tell you that they were living in Egypt, you know, way down south. You know where that is? Where there's the Pharaohs. And they were there for 400 years. And it got really tough. And they got so sick and tired of living that type of life that they cried out to God. And God sent a deliverer by the name of Moses to them. And God delivered them out of 400 years out of Egypt. And now we're brought to a promised land. But by getting to the promised land, we got out of Egypt. We looked behind us, and there were these armies. They changed their mind. They wanted to pursue us again. So we were running as fast as we can, and we get to this place where there's a Red Sea, and we're like, oh, man, they're going to get us now. And just when we thought there was no way for us to survive, the sea opens, Matthew. The sea opens. And they go through on dry land. God miraculously saves them again. And they go through on dry land. And then the waters come back together and drown the enemies. And Matthew, I want to tell you this, because I think it was about 8 days after that. They were around this mountain, and it's Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. And Moses went on top of the mountain, and he warned all of our ancestors, don't touch the mountain, don't come close to the mountain, because God is about to come down. God is about to show that his characteristics. God is about to show his attributes, because he's going to come to us. He's going to descend into our darkness. And they tell us that when God came down this mountain and was given the law to Moses, that the mountain, this huge piece of land, began to shake and it began to smoke. And everybody was in fear and awe, because God came down. And they would say, wow. So you go back to the exiles, they would say, what was will inform what is, and tell me that what is will not always be. And I want you to catch that, because that's very, very important. They would say it like this. Exiles, why can you rejoice? Why can you wait in your misery? Why can you rejoice in your pain? And they would go, because I remember one day God came down on a mountain. So what does that tell you about God? That I serve a faithful God. That if he would take the time and the initiative to come down on top of a mountain, that he must love me, that he must care for me. It tells me about his faithfulness. So I go back to think about what was, to remind me that what is will not always be. Huh? That's good. That's good. I was just showing you there's good places to clap and there's bad places to clap. That was a good place to clap. All right? Because there are times that we have to walk ourselves back into what was, how God has met our needs in the past, to inform us of the faith that we should have right now. Anybody ever have to remember how God's been faithful to you in your past? You have to go back to your was to remind you that your is will not always be. That there is a shall come. And you just say, well, you could just have this wishful thinking and this hope that hopefully God will take me out of this situation. And I'm not telling anybody that God's going to exactly take you out of a certain situation, but I will tell you this, that God will come down and be with you in every situation. And that makes all the difference in the world. But when I go back and think about how God was, I think about it. Even if I'm waiting for God to answer me now, even though I'm struggling, even though I'm grieving, even though I'm in pain, what I do is I start informing myself of who God is and the character of God. And it tells me, even though you're in this situation now, your God is a faithful God, because he's a God that is, was, and is to come. He doesn't He doesn't change. It would do us all good at times to build our faith and to remind ourselves of what God has done for us. So the Bible's filled with exilic themes, means the theme of exile, right? So we're exiled from the garden. In 722, the Assyrians come in, start exiling. And then in 586, the Babylonians, the superpower of the day. And then the Persians take over. And the Persians allow Jerusalem, or the Jews, to come back to their city, to Jerusalem, and rebuild the temple. Right? I don't know if you guys know what that history is, because some of this history now is going to fall into 400 years in between the Testaments. You have to go to the library to get this information. And then within that time, Alexander the Great in 337 BC begins to take his conquest of everything, but then that doesn't last long, and Rome becomes the major power, and I think they become the major power for about 400 years, which is a long time for a country to have power. But here's the deal. Even though Jews went back to Jerusalem, they were still under the thumb of somebody else. There was always somebody telling them what to do. If it wasn't the Babylonians, it was the Persians. If it wasn't the Persians, it was the Greeks. If it wasn't the Greeks, it was the Romans. All the way even till when Jesus comes. And then in 70 AD, the temple is destroyed for good. The temple is tore down. But there's different prophets in the Bible, like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Daniel and Ezekiel. And they're all speaking towards a certain time. Well, Isaiah is speaking before Israel is deported to Babylon. So Isaiah is speaking and giving a prophecy. What he's doing, prophecy is a foretelling of what will happen. And I want you to listen to this. This is kind of a prayer too. He says, "Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down." You ever prayed something like that? Dear God, please come. That the mountains might quake at your presence. But verse 3, he says, when you did awesome things that we did not look for. When you came down, the mountains quaked at your presence. And what I want you to see is what he's referring to. He says, I'm praying that you will come down again. He says, when you did awesome things, remember when you did that, when you came down and the mountain quaked at your presence. And what he's talking to and what he's referencing is the act of Sinai, when God came down to Sinai. So now that they're in misery, and now they're in waiting, they're going back and they're saying, you've done it before. We know that you can do it again. Because it's really good to help build your faith. Let me build your faith like they would have built the exiles' faith. Let me take you back to when God radically delivered you, or God came in and saved you. How many can go back and remember when God said, hey, there's a better you. There's a new you. I want to create a new creation in you. I want to put purpose and hope inside of you. How many can remember, go back and remember that day? Right. So go back. Build your faith on what was. Remember how he's been faithful to you in your past. But then sometimes when we get saved, we think, oh, we got this now. We get a little cocky and we're walking out of Egypt. And there's something in front of us that trips us up. Like someone does something stupid to us, breaks our trust. Or we lose a job, or we lose a family member. I'm like, man, this isn't so great. And there's a Red Sea there. How many can remember that moment when you have come to something that was like a Red Sea to you? Something that was going to block you from going forward, and you felt like the enemy was pressing in on you. And then for somehow, God came in and the waters just went, shoo. And you're like, what in the world is going on here? I don't know, but I'm just going to walk on through the sea. And you walked on through the sea, and the waters came in behind you, and the enemies were defeated. And how many of you have ever had those moments where you've had with God, whether it is in a church service or alone by yourself or in your car, when you felt like God took the time just to come down to talk to you? Even though there's millions of people in this world, he took the time to speak to your heart on your couch, in your car, at the church, so that he could encourage you to say, I am your God. I'm your provision. I'm your hope. I'm your healer. Because sometimes when we're waiting, we have to walk ourselves back to the past to remind us that what we're experiencing now won't always be. You can wait. We're going to have to wait. Everybody's going to wait. You can either wait informed or uninformed. Some people say, well, they had hope. I'd say no, they had more than hope, because hope doesn't have a lot of substance, but faith has a lot of substance. I don't want just hope. I want faith. In fact, I don't want to have hope that I get a raise. I want to have faith I'm going to get a raise, right? Because you know what that means? It gives me evidence that I'm going to get a raise. If you're sitting around doing your household budget at your house, and you tell someone there, you say, man, I hope I get a raise. All you're telling them is, I just have wishful thinking that I'm going to get a raise. You have no reason to think you're getting a raise other than you just have this desire. That's what hope. Hope I get it. I wish I get it. But if you say, I've got faith, that means that a week before, your boss came into your office and sat down and said, you know what, you have done such a great job at our company. You've hit all the benchmarks. Your evaluations are off the charts. And I want you to know, I'm considering going to my superior and putting in a good word for you. I hope they'll give you a raise. So now you've got some evidence. Now you've got faith that is sunk in evidence. And they would say, no, I'm not just hoping that God's going to come. I have faith that God's going to come. Why? Why? It's important. The rest of your life, this is important. Why do you have faith that he shall come to you, exiles? Because he came before. That means he came from where he was. He descended on top of a mountain, which only God can descend on top of something. Everybody else has to ascend to something. He descended on top of the mountain. It shook. So that gives us an idea about the character of God. If someone travels a long way to see you and tend to you and meet a need, that tells you a little bit about them. If someone comes and visits you in the hospital, if someone calls you, if someone comes to you from a long ways, that tells you a little bit about their character. So he came to us, and it tells us about his character. And that telling of the character informs me right now, informs my faith, informs my feelings, informs everything about me. That what is won't always be. Now, here's where I wanted to leave it, because I'm going to pick up from this next week with a lot of history. A lot of history in between that 400 years that's not found in the Bible, found in the history books. They look back at God coming down on top of the mountain so that they could say, rejoice, rejoice, O Emmanuel shall come to me, O Israel. We look back on when God came down to us in the form of a baby to bust the darkness with his light, to find us and give us a way. We look back on the event on Christmas to say, what is right now will not always be, because the character of God was made known to us because he was willing to come down to us. Are you guys getting this? Don't nod if you're not, but I hope that you are, because if you want to have a life that's full of faith now, we're going to have trouble. You have trouble. I have trouble. We're going to want things to change. They're not going to change as quickly as we want to. If we don't want to live in despair, we have to go back and say, where can I find that God was active in the world? This is a historical event. The world celebrates the time that God came down to this earth. So if God came down to this earth, it has to reveal something about his character to me, which he doesn't change, because he is, he was, and he is to come. And that means that what he was back then, he is today. And I can put my faith. John said it like this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We have seen his glory, glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John, meaning John the Baptist, bore witness about him and cried out, this was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because before me he was before me. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. We believe that God came down to this earth. So what that tells us is that God enters into our darkness and plays by the rules of the kingdoms of this world so that he can usher in a kingdom that's not of this world. And keep this on there. I want this to sing. God enters into our darkness. He plays by the rules of the kingdoms of this world because he had to, so that he could usher in a kingdom that's not of this world. Here's how I wanted to start this. I want you to find faith in Christmas. I don't want you to just look at Christmas and go, oh, baby is born. No, I want you to say, okay, it's Christmas. God sent Jesus into the world. What does that tell me about God? And you figure it out. You answer it for yourself. And if you're a skeptic, why don't you just approach it this way? And if you're here and you're skeptic, welcome. If you're an atheist and you don't believe, welcome. But I just want you to play a game with me. I just want you to say, what if this was true? What if it was really true that a God sent his son into this world, the world that was he created, that we messed up? What would that tell me about that God? No, really. How good a God would that be? And how reliable of a God would that be? And how faithful of a God would that be? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to find faith in Christmas, that when you think about Christmas this year, you don't only get happy and rejoice. I want you to say, that builds my faith for right now about the character and characteristics who God is. He's willing to come down. He came down then. He'll come down right now. So what was is going to inform me that what is will not always be. Amen? All right. Good stuff. All right, won't you stand? Let me pronounce the blessing. I do want to highlight that, what's today, the 2nd? On the 16th is when we're going out. We're not going to have church, but we're going to go out to be the church. And we want everybody at Praise to participate. And here's why I want everybody at Praise to participate. I want you to experience the joy of giving. It's a part of your discipleship to give and to bless people. And we're giving you the opportunity and your family to experience it together. And here's the second reason I want you to go, is because I want people who are in our community to experience the joy of receiving. And they're not going to receive unless we have people to send out that can give. Because here's the beauty of this event. It's on a Sunday at 10 o'clock. And the people that we talk to, guess where they're not? Where aren't they? They're at church. We have a demographic right there. We're not going out to church people. That's not our target anyway. They're already safe. We're just going to show up and say, hey, Jesus came to us, and we're coming to you just to say, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. You're loved. You're not forgotten. So the more people we can send out, if it makes you nervous to do that, let me just ask you to step outside your comfort zone. Not for your sake. Don't think about your sake on this one. Think about the sake of the people that you can reach, because you never know what one gift will do for somebody and how God may use that to change the eternity for someone else. Amen? Amen. All right. May the Lord bless you. May he keep you. May he make his face shine down upon you. May he turn his countenance upon you. And may he grant you his peace, his shalom, that will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. I bless you in the name that is higher than any other name, that is the name of Jesus. And everybody said, amen. Amen. Thanks for being at Praise today. God bless.